Hello and welcome to Project Insight's Professional Development Series. Today we're on session 2 of 4. We're focusing on the critical aspect of project success, the value of measuring with KPIs. As organizations grow, keeping projects on track becomes more complex. Without clear, measurable goals, teams can lose alignment and project outcomes become harder to evaluate. That's why key performance indicators are essential, as they provide the data-driven insights needed to track progress, improve decision-making, and ensure sustainable success. Today you'll learn how to define effective KPIs to measure this success, why KPIs are critical for improving team alignment and decision-making, how to avoid common KPI pitfalls and focus on meaningful metrics, and the role KPIs play in communication, ensuring leadership stay informed and engaged. A few housekeeping items. Everyone will be on mute. Feel free to use the chat at any point to ask questions or just say hi. Please feel free to share where you're even joining from right now. This webinar is valid for 1 PDU, but you must attend to the end of the session in order to get credit. The PDU certificates will be emailed to you before the end of the week. This link will stand, and this recording will be accessible via it. Let me introduce our experts. Steve West is the founder and CEO of Project Insight. He's helped thousands of organizations streamline their project and program management for greater efficiency. And Diane Buckley-Altwies is the CEO of Core Performance Concepts. She's a PMP certified expert and in training and leadership and author. We're, as always, extremely lucky to be learning from you both. You guys ready to get started?
I think so. Hey,
Wonderful.
Steve.
Great, Diane, take it away.
All right. So last month we started talking about what KPIs are. So that today we're going to talk a little bit more about, what might be the appropriate KPIs for what you're working on, and why does it matter, and how do we measure things along the way? Because I think one of the critical things, or not critical things, but one of the things that many of us project managers have experienced over the years is we've all had that one project that you get to the end, and then the customer says, that's not what I wanted, or this isn't working for me. So, the whole idea of KPIs is about and measuring them along the way is about ensuring that you get where you want to go. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Great.
So the first one is really defining what are the right KPIs. And there's so many different KPIs. And, I know we've talked about this a lot of times before is, how many should you have on your project, or what you're working on, how many? So anybody remember what that was?
The correct amount.
Not too many, I guess, is really the right answer.
Yeah.
Not too many, because what happens when you have too many, how are you going to measure them all? And if some are positive and some are negative as resulting, do you really know whether or not you've succeeded? So we've talked about this from the terms of objectives and goals for your project, but KPIs fall right into that context and that conversation about you don't want to be measuring too many things, because you'll never succeed if you're measuring too many things. And also too, it's a lot of administrative work to track everything, right?
Yeah, do you have a rule of thumb for that? 3 main KPIs, 10.
An odd number is always good, because you can break a tie. You know how that works, right?
Yeah.
I preferred like 2 or 3. Just like 3 is probably fine, because if you're trying to accomplish too many things at once, what's the odds of you accomplishing them all? Right? You got to really stay focused on what you're trying to deliver. And when we're talking about KPIs, I mean, we got all hour to talk about KPIs. But if we try to focus on too many things at once, we won't be able to focus on one and do it successfully. Mm-hmm. So first, we want to just talk about like types of KPIs, and we really, as project managers or even leadership within an organization, is what are those key measurements that tell me what's going on in my organization or in my project? And there's different types. We've got strategic, which could be about, revenue. It could be about market share. It could be about new products. You got departmental, like, maybe in the PMO department, you've got things that you're trying to accomplish, or in the accounting department or in the engineering department. Those measurements in each department are going to be very different than the ones potentially at the organizational level. Now, they should tie out and they should support each other, but they're going to be different. And then you got your project, from the perspective of the client and also from maybe a product that you're trying to accomplish. I know that we have clients that I work with that, many times we're trying to keep them in a lane of the things that are part of our product. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, as you probably can imagine, Steve, sometimes you're doing things very custom for a client for a specific reason. Yeah. Right. So there'll be very different objectives, every project that you're talking about. And then individually, you can have personal growth KPIs. Like I want to, do, 20 hours of training a year, and that's my goal, or I want to write a book, or I want to, and how am I going to get there? Right. So if I'm going to write a book, I want to be able to measure the number of chapters I've, accomplished every single month, whatever that might be. But there's many, many different types of organizational KPIs that you could be looking at. And additionally, there's kind of industry KPIs, right? So it's be more global across what, the organization you're in, and what might be interesting or important to know based on an industry would be very different. Like in healthcare, I mean, we've all had patient satisfaction surveys, right? Or, right. If you're a doctor or whatever, maybe you want to look at the outcomes of your patients based on the different treatments that you're, proposing with them. Or, I don't know, we have that here in Florida, but there's even, because I guess emergency room wait time has been an issue. We get billboards out there that say this emergency room only has a 3-minute wait time if you need to go. I mean, I've seen things like that too.
Yeah, I think that's pretty universal. I've seen that here in Phoenix as well, Diane, where clearly that's the focus. And obviously when you're having that emergency, you really care about that KPI, right? That
my thing is like, would I be thinking about looking for a billboard if I'm running to the emergency room? Probably not, but kind of seeing that once in a while says, oh, maybe that, if I see it low on a regular basis, maybe I'll think about that particular hospital if I need that emergency, right?
Yep.
If you're in a technology company, Steve, I mean, there's certain things that Project Insight probably measures, right?
Well, definitely bug reduction, deployment, speed of how you deploy, obviously those kinds of things.
Do you ever look at like the churn rate of
oh, yeah.
your clients and stuff? So again, as a technology company, you're going to have people that potentially sign up and then leave, but you always want to see that it's a positive churn where it's always growing. So that's another indicator that's very common in technology.
Yeah, I mean, like, certain projects like better documentation or integrating, how self-help systems, those would be designed, the KPIs for that type of project would be, we want to improve our freemium conversion rates.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those kinds of things, because someone might sign up and, and then they have to learn how to use the product without any help.
Right.
Those kinds of things.
Absolutely agree. Manufacturing also is a little bit different too. For those that don't know what MTBF, it's mean time between failure. So a lot of time manufacturing is always about talking about reducing the cost of a widget, and how do we get to that point, or increasing reliability, and reliability measurement is or MTBF is one measure of reliability. Financial services, net promoter score, you see a lot of places, not just financial services, net promoter score, you're seeing a lot. And it basically is a measure of your clients on whether or not they would promote you. Right. And, time to open an account, like if you're with a bank or something like that, people don't want to wait. They gave them their money. I want to see my account. I want to have access to it. I had somebody the other day went to the bank to get a new ATM card, and they had to wait like 24 hours before they can have access to their money. And she was like, why? Why can't I just have a card like now that works now? But, so that was an interesting one. So there's lots and lots of different kinds of KPIs. There's also a concept of leading and lagging. So if we're talking about like the churn rate or an unemployment rate, or, things that kind of look backward on the performance of what has been happening, those are more of a lagging kind of indicator. leading indicators are kind of giving us a sense of the trend. So like that net promoter score, it's like, what's the likelihood of somebody promoting your organization is more of a leading indicator. Satisfaction surveys is also kind of a leading indicator because, if somebody's starting to get unsatisfied, you might need to do something about that to fix that problem. They haven't left yet, but they might be unsatisfied. So that would be more of a leading indicator. Or, quantity of new registrants, new signups, that would also be a leading. So maybe you normally see, 10 a week and it's starting to be like 14, 15, 20 a week. That could be kind of a leading indicator versus, let's look back what happened in the last couple of months. What was the unemployment rate, or what was, how many firms left us? So there's definitely difference. And you want to have you want to think about that mix of leading and lagging when you're putting together your KPIs, because you probably don't always want to be looking at lagging indicators. You probably also want to sprinkle in some leading indicators depending on what you're looking at. And so lots to think about, right? And,
Yep.
You think it's kind of easy, like we talked about the charter before, and we're going to kind of continue to talk it. The charter should have, what are those goals and objectives of that project? Well, now we're asking, how am I going to measure accomplishing those goals and objectives? And that's where the KPIs kind of come into play. Think of it not just from a project perspective, from an organization perspective. I've got goals of the organization. I want to double the size of our organization in 5 years, right? From a revenue standpoint. Well, how am I going to measure that? How am I going to look at it? Am I just going to grow revenue by more users, or am I going to grow revenue by offering new products? Right. Some very different conversations that you have to be able to put a good set of KPIs together. Do you guys ever been in an organization where you have KPIs and you don't ever know how they relate to the goals of the organization?
How they apply at all, right? Yes, I have personally, or even sometimes you end up on a project or on a team where you're focused, you feel like you're rowing this way where you're looking to really go north, right? And you're going west with the work that you're doing.
What I've seen a lot of is departments will create their KPIs. They might create them aligned with the corporation, but they don't align them between departments.
Right.
So what happens when that happens? You end up, to your point, you get a bit disconnected and you get going in the wrong direction. And at some point in time, somebody's going to say, oops, we've gone down the wrong path. And that's also one of the values of a KPI, because if you've got 5 different departments with different KPIs at some point in time, and you're tracking those KPIs, at some point in time, somebody's KPIs won't be working. Yeah. Right. And something's going to have to switch. You're going to have to switch gears or trying to figure out why. So that's kind of where we get into the whole concept of, why are they important? And the last thing I just want to say here on definition of KPIs is, you may also have a set of standard KPIs, like for each of your projects that you start. So like project, you might be on time or on budget. Those might be typical things that you see. There might be efficiency improvements. Maybe your software or your product helps clients improve their efficiency. So maybe one of the things that you want to have measured with your client is those efficiency gains. I was talking the other day with a project manager, and they don't do a good job of asking that up front. And the culture in the organization isn't such that they're concerned about the client's ultimate KPIs. But don't you think we should be?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard to balance that.
I know it is hard to balance, but I want to keep their intent in mind. I had on a separate item is we had a client that wanted an enhancement that did a certain task, did it in a certain way, but they also are very, very, very sensitive to the user experience and how it looks. Mm-hmm. And we did a decent job at delivering the specific tasks and the specific features, but we did a really lousy job at the look and feel. And so what do you think the client said?
Terrible.
They said they didn't like it.
Didn't like it, even though it does function per what the scope of the work said it should do. It wasn't pretty. And if you know the client, and we know that client's very specific on very picky on how things look and what, because they're presenting this to their client and it's a reflection of them. So we do have to consider those KPIs and objectives of the ultimate client as well. Otherwise, we're still going to get the pushback when we're trying to deliver something.
Even if you hit the efficiency, right? Even if that goal was to reduce, the time that somebody spends on doing this by X amount of, whatever that looks like. But if they don't like the way that it functions, it's not going to be used anyway, right? At that point.
Right. Exactly. If it ends up being, to them perceived as cumbersome, even though maybe the end result gets where you want, but so that's again, we're good at identifying goals and objectives in our project, in our charter. We might have some KPIs that we want to measure, but we're not necessarily, we're not necessarily good at measuring the KPIs over time and then tying it to other areas and looking beyond just our own narrow, world on how what we do affects others. So it's a complicated thing.
Yeah. And then you mentioned a minute ago having a standard set of KPIs. And I think that for a project, at least, having those standard KPIs, the benefit of being able to do that is then you can use, like in our tool, we have a scorecard. So you could actually, in the scorecard for your requests, you'll say, this is what we expect the outcome to be. And then that actually helps you prioritize. But, it is difficult to have standard KPIs when one project increases revenue, one satisfies a client need, and something else might be an efficiency gain in your operations, right? So those are three very different projects, and success is going to be measured differently.
Yeah, and what you have to do is kind of float to the top the things that might be the most important for those projects, right? And we've had this conversation before. You don't want a lot of KPIs. You don't want to be measuring a lot of them. So you really do have to take some time and think about what are the handful that really will make sense for this particular project. And maybe, like you said, having some standard ones and standard, like on the project management side, maybe within Project Insight, we know how we can track, cost and time and maybe even some quality, but in this particular case we're only going to focus on the cost one. Maybe that's the not have to worry about tracking the other ones, even though there might be some capabilities to do that. That's not the most important thing that we want to track, and that's an individual project standpoint.
Yeah, and I like the idea that we talked about right at the beginning is you'll pick 3 critical ones that you'll be your main KPIs that you care about. Doesn't mean you can't have the secondary set of KPIs in the background.
Exactly.
We get that a lot, actually, with the efficiency gains that we can create. Sometimes it's not even about that for our clients. They really just care about the budget pieces, right? Did we hit on time? Did we hit our objective as far as budget's concerned or not? And that's all we really are going to be focused on for that implementation. So
if there was a KPI popularity contest, I'm pretty sure revenue is right at the top for everybody.
It's called self-preservation as an organization, right?
Yeah. So you pretty much go right to, that's like your go-to, right? So it's going to be hard. In some projects we know don't do anything with revenue, but then they end up being the redheaded stepchild projects, right?
Well, when from a product perspective, that's where I also see some gaps, because a lot of times companies treat every project initiative or project enhancement, like product enhancement, equally. Although a product feature may be valued very differently in the marketplace and be the driver for revenue, where another one is more of a cleanup or a more user experience kind of thing, but not necessarily a revenue producer. So within product management, there's very different value to enhancement that you do to product, and a lot of times we don't do a good enough job understanding what we expect from these features in the marketplace from a revenue perspective. And I'd love to see more of that. And that ties into talking to your clients more, understanding what they would see valuable and be willing to pay more for, right? And
improving the feature may keep people happy, right? So that increase your net promoter score, that keeps your churn rate
down, right?
All
exactly.
That stuff.
Exactly.
I think that's where having that nice scoring process as you're bringing those projects in is extremely important, because often, we'll see organizations who just kind of go first in, first out sort of thing without the idea of where should these be from, that, popularity winner of revenue, if that's what we're looking at or whatever that would be. So.
And it can change over time. It could be, this year, this is their focus is revenue. Maybe next year is more, enhancing the experience. I don't know. It could change. And that's, that's the fun part, if not the challenging part of managing projects.
And for sure here with our, we really take the retention really critically here. So, our company, we've been very focused because most of our, we really focus on our enterprise clients a lot. And so, over the years, we've really worked on that, and we've done a really nice job of keeping that, up about 90%, above 90%.
That's awesome.
So,
retention is very important in software.
But one other question, and I may be jumping ahead here a little bit, is that, so if you're identifying these KPIs, like, do you score it and say, yes, I met it, like 10? How do you, because some of them can't be quantified just with a dollar amount. Like, I want to increase revenue. Do you say that, we did outstanding at that, or we did a poor job? Like, what are the ways that people need to rate the KPIs,
I don't know if I would say that there's a way to rate them. We should be measuring them, and at least, because some of them are more quantifiable than others. So, if you can, that might be a good one, but I don't know if you can do it consistently across. So it's like, it's kind of perfect timing there, Steve. But if I should be building within my project time to kind of test the waters, litmus test where we are. Are we tracking to these KPIs? And the reason I have the little motorcycle guy here is because if you are just going so fast and not measuring along the way, you're going to get to the end and you're going to say, oh, shoot, and you're not going to have any time to react.
Yeah.
Right. So if we're measuring along the way, taking a little bit more time to kind of slow down a second, let's see where we are. Let's adjust what we need to adjust and then move forward. That is a better approach than just going, 100 miles an hour and getting things done fast. And then you get to the end and you don't even have any expectation of what it's going to look like at the end on any project. So measuring along the way, and whether or not you categorize them or have a scoring mechanism is certainly possible.
Yeah.
That's why I kind of lean towards less KPIs for any project or any initiative, the better, because you want to track something, and that's typically, you got to make sure that you're tracking it. You want to take the time to stop and review it and measure it. And that could be quantifiable, it could be qualifiable, right? And then you want to be able to respond to it, so how you, I guess it depends on the.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that you would have, the way we're kind of talking about it, it's like you either met the KPI or you didn't, but sometimes that line of meeting it or not might be gray, and it might make sense to say we met it really well, or
Yeah.
we somewhat met it, or we neutrally met it, or we didn't meet it, we didn't meet it by a lot,
Or
you know.
you can use the whole concept of the net promoter scores. Like
Yeah.
organizationally, organizations are doing the net promoter score, and it's not that you get to a 10.
So it's a percentage in that case. That's
Where is it today, and am I tracking? Is it getting a little bit better? And where
right,
am I getting a bit better in? And where am I lagging behind in? And what do I need to act on?
But
as we get the results back.
To the point of our motorcycle guy here, right, or gal, whoever it happens to be under that helmet, it's the idea that we're looking as we go. You can go 90, kilometers per hour as long as you slow down, make the adjustments, and then speed back up, right? As opposed to waiting until the end of the year when you're supposed to score and say, how can we change this at this point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I even use. Okay.
So the question then is, like, you've set your KPIs, you started your project. Let's say it's a year-long project. Should somebody measure it once a month, once a quarter, and give yourself a rating on each of those KPIs?
At the minimum, a reasonable frequency that makes sense to your team. Sometimes you're going to be limited by when data is available, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you might have only monthly data to look at. If it's important enough and you needed weekly data, maybe that's part of the project to increase the ability to get weekly data. So again, it's, if you're doing a year-long project, I wouldn't say you measure it once, right? You probably measure it on a monthly basis, reasonable measurement. And again, when are you reporting? When are you reporting and communicating to the customer or your the recipient of your effort that you're doing? Corporations, a lot of times they're doing quarterly. They might, at the board level, they might be looking at it monthly, but they're reporting it out maybe quarterly to the marketplace and to the employees, kind of thing. So I also like to give the example here because my husband is a merchant marine. So if those big cargo ships, they're 1,000 feet long, and it just kind of highlights the challenge when you wait too long, because if they're going at top speed, which might be 35 miles an hour, on the ocean, right? And if they have to stop immediately, so you talk about that whole Francis Scott Key Bridge and stuff, and they weren't even going fast. But if they're going top speed and they have to stop fast, they literally throw it in reverse, which burns a lot of fuel, right? And throw it in reverse, but it still takes them a mile to stop. A whole mile. So it applies to what we're talking about is, what's the appropriate speed for which we should be going? What's the importance of the project and what the objectives we're trying to do? More important for the organization or for your department than probably the more frequently you should be measuring. And then you've got to stop to measure. So, again, sprints and things like that, also very, very similar to kind of why sprints and agile methodologies became popular, because you're trying to measure and demonstrate along the way your progress. So it's very aligned with the agile methodology. And then, when we're talking about overall objectives or KPIs, what we do, regardless of where we are in the organization, we're delivering value, right? We're delivering value to the organization. And what are those results that we're looking for? And how important are those results? And this kind of talks a little bit more about, or what I want to talk about here is, a lot of times I see KPIs and objectives, either one, where we have them written, but we have no way to measure them. And we only can do it very manually. So I would challenge anybody that puts KPIs out there and says, and if they ask themselves the question, well, how am I going to measure this regularly? And if the answer is, well, we're going to have to track this manually every single day. Well, therein lies a potential problem. Are you going to get good data? And is it going to be consistent? So you might, depending on the importance of the project, you might need to have a part of your project where you're creating a more automated way to track that kind of data, because you have to ask yourself, is the data going to be important for others later on too? Or is it just purely for this particular project and it's never going to be used again? But anytime I see manual tracking of things, I cringe.
Well, a lot of people do it because it's so difficult. It's not, there's not a lot of automated ways just without some setup.
I know.
And if you're a small organization or you have a small project team, it's not like you have tons of access to resources to spend on this.
So thing is what KPIs can I measure easily?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about 3 KPIs and all 3 of them are manual, that's going to be a challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if one of them is manual and 2 of them, so think about how you get to measure them, and don't put yourself in a corner on things that are really done very off. Use the tools they have available. Like there's also tools like we talked about earlier, real-time data. You've got data that might just be available monthly. Think about what's available.
Yeah.
And try to leverage what's available and only go down that manual path when it's absolutely necessary, or build something into your project if it's really critical to measure something that isn't measurable today.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's where like a tool like Project Insight can at least help you get automated data for some KPIs, am I on track with my schedule and those kinds of things. So you can use a tool like that, but I also agree that let's say you're trying to get your net promoter score, if that data can just be real time to you, then that's great. And then you can make an assessment, am I meeting my KPI or not? But then if you have to scour through a bunch of data manually in Excel and spend hours and hours gathering that information, maybe that KPI is not the best one to use, right?
And the net promoter score is an interesting one too, because maybe if the net promoter score is critical to your project, and let's say your project's 6 months in duration, okay? Mm-hmm. But net promoter score, well, maybe your organization's only doing a net promoter score survey once every 3 months. Well, I'd be like,
yeah, that one's a hard one because you also have to motivate your customers to actually participate in that, and that costs them time.
Right. So you have to ask the question. It's like, okay, if I only get two rounds of data that exist, am I okay with that?
Yeah.
And if I am, fine. If I'm not, is there a way to do it more frequently?
Right.
And if that's not possible, then you ask the question, is it that important? Then maybe I have to do something offline, something similar to at least assess what a net promoter score might look like.
I mean, some KPI, let's say your KPI is increasing your website traffic, right? Is provided that you have, analytics, which most everybody does these days on your website, then that would be an easy KPI to measure, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just
absolutely. I mean, there's so many variations, and all what I'm recommending here is, identify a handful, consider how you're going to track it, and don't do too many manual items. Leverage what's available as much as you can, because that also tells you if there's things that are available, somebody else is using that data as well. So you might be better aligned with other departments and other organizational objectives if it's being measured elsewhere.
Yeah. And one thing I do think is easier these days than maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago is that more and more young people coming into the workforce actually are pretty skilled with, using computers and using these things. So it does, I think just societally we've moved forward a lot. Imagine in the 90s, people didn't even know what the internet was, right? So nowadays we've got a lot more skilled workers in the workforce that you can use to leverage to help you with this.
I do have to, though, when back in the 80s, Excel was around, and Excel had formulas back then too.
Yeah.
It just didn't have as many rows as it has today. It's not like 600,000 rows you can do now, but it did exist, and it was
and I was suggesting to someone, and this is a side topic, but everyone loves to complain about Excel, how terrible it is. But imagine if you wrote the software that everyone hates so much they have to use it.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't hate it. I actually like it.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. We try to get people out of that because I think that really when what ends up happening with tools like that is you end up just it becomes like a blank canvas all the time.
Oh no,
And so
I get that.
right,
Yeah,
so
it's ad hoc. It's an awesome tool
right,
for being ad hoc, not necessarily for making consistency, because
right.
people do, sharing is a problematic. No, I totally get that.
That's the difference between the automatic ones and the manual entries, right?
Right.
Project Insight can do time and budget without you doing anything else other than inputting your actuals, right? Where in Excel, you need to enter each of those cells to get those KPI,
Right.
outputs.
I mean, if you have 20 projects in 20 different Excels, and we see this all the time with when customers come on board, they're like, oh, we got our project or a Microsoft project or something. And then you have to link all these spreadsheets together to get aggregated information. If you want a portfolio view, then you've got manual processes. So definitely using the tools nowadays does help.
I agree. We digress. We digress back to the 80s and 90s. All good. But if you have data and it's readily available, the reality is you're going to make better decisions. And going back to our little motorcycle person, it's if I'm measuring along the way and I'm identifying how I'm tracking to these KPIs, I'm going to be able to make better decisions faster. If I have to wait to collect a lot of data, then it's going to slow down the process even more. So that's why it's so important to make sure that you're trying to identify the KPIs that you can measure relatively easily, unless it's super important, so that you can make better decisions as you're going along and quicker decisions as we're going along. You got to focus on what's important. You can get overwhelmed with the amount of data, overwhelmed with the number of KPIs, and if you don't understand why that KPI is important, it might not be a KPI you really want,
Right.
All right. So now let's tie this all into, what we do in project management all the time, the communication plan. So those of us that are on the call here that have, gotten their PMPs or their CAPM or, our professional project managers out there in the workforce, we all know that we have to do a communication plan. And those communication plans require us to know who our audience is, how we're messaging those individuals, what delivery method we're doing, the frequency of that communication, and where we're getting that data from. So KPIs just get inserted right in here as part of that messaging type. Like, what am I telling them about? What am I communicating? If Steve is interested in his net promoter score and how we're tracking how this project is going to help him get that net promoter score up, then that's what we should be communicating to him. He doesn't care about the 40 other things we could be measuring. What he cares about is how he's going to see that net promoter score go up, or how Steve's going to ensure that, we don't lose clients and that we continue at that retention rate of 99% and above, that we're not going to hurt that. So KPIs, knowing those KPIs of the people that all your stakeholders and what's important to them and what the goal of this project is, all need to be aligned so that you're communicating in a common and consistent manner with your clients. So one thing, this also plays to that example I said earlier, where we delivered the features and they worked, but the user didn't like how it looked.
The experience of using
was
it.
Terrible.
Yeah.
And then, if we're like some other ones that I've seen where, like, if the goal is to, let's say, integrate, Project Insight, you already have an integration with Jira, but let's say there was a major integration with Jira, and, how is that going to improve the overall process? So what is the goal there? And what should we measure? Are we trying to have a two-way integration or just a one-way integration? What's the pros and cons? And what is the savings we're expecting when that gets put in place? So, and you can test those things. You can do time studies and things like that on how long it's taken today, in the current process, and compare it as you're going through your reviews on how the new process might be improved in less time, taken in doing those integration, those steps,
those
when you have
processes.
Yeah.
That's what our success team actually does with, pieces we do with our customers. How long is this taking you now? What is this taking you at the end of the implementation?
Right. And we were talking too, like, I think you have some stuff we can show on Project Insight where we at least identify those KPIs from a communication standpoint, and then how we can incorporate that into the project, right, Matt?
Yeah, we do. We
show
have
your
the
screen.
ability here.
That's
Voila,
a hint.
it's magic. There you go.
You didn't take the cue.
We have the ability here to, just really input and track what this project is going to be. So, where am I? I'm in a project level within our tool. I'm on one of many views that you can look at. We're actually looking at an example charter here where we've actually entered our KPIs, right? So this is what we're going to do. It can be something really high level like this where, everybody has visibility into it, including those different resources, right? To your point, Steve wants to know how many new customers we've brought in, not how many meetings we held this past week, right? So
right.
We want to make sure that we're able to get that information to who our stakeholders are. It can be high level like we were just looking at, where we're saying this is it on the project level, or it can get even granular to what, we've been talking about, where it's automated, based on the actual time, based on the actual effort that we've put in, what the budget pieces are, or even milestone based, right, Diane, where I'm coming in and saying, I had expected this outcome. This is an example of PDU hours given, right? We're all here giving PDU hours. We had expected this. We actually gave 130, right? We had expected on our second one 100. We gave 90, right? So we fell a little short here.
So milestone measurements, and you incorporate that into your project schedule, and that's what we should be doing.
Exactly. And then the goal of, the win of Project Insight here is back to the stakeholders. I can have automatic messaging for the primary project manager, the senior leaders, that just give them these outcomes, or they can go into a dashboard and look at it in real time over time, right? Where they can then understand, what was expected. Here's my green line and where we actually fell, both over time. We can look at it on a project by project basis in the event that multiple projects are serving that same KPI set. Mm-hmm. And then we can even analyze what's successful, right? Which projects are the most yielding? Which types of projects are we getting the most benefit out of? It's really up to us and what we want to display here on that. So,
No, that's absolutely great. And again, it's all about planning what you want to measure, and then incorporating that as part of your plan.
And I think, Matt, what in terms of implementing this, if in case some self-servers are in there, what Matt was doing is he made the fields on the specific types of objects he cared about. In that in the one case, he's measuring at the task level, but you can make either your own fields right on the project, right on some tasks, right on the portfolio or program. Most of our clients, what we end up helping them do is decide where these things should go, where do they belong, because once you've standardized the fields in the system, now you can measure them across all your projects.
Well, even with our, one of our newer updates, I can even sync this idea of project level KPIs down to the task level, if that's the way that you have those in a drop-down list where you're saying, this is what that is, based on those tasks being complete or not, or you hitting your goals. You can then automatically send that communication out to the appropriate stakeholders with what they want to know as well.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah.
Karen asked how was she getting that, and basically Matt had created a field. I suggest that the simplest way is you can add the various fields you want on the project level is the easiest way to.
Yeah.
Well, in his case, he's listing what the KPIs are, but if you want to have across many projects a way to measure certain KPIs, you might make like I was saying, kind of alluding to earlier, a real simple way to do it would be to label the field and then have like a rating, like I made it by a lot or a little, just keeping it really simple.
Yeah.
Did it by a lot, did it by a little, or didn't meet it? Met clearly, might have met, didn't meet.
What's really cool is you are you're archiving or what you're storing within Project Insight, the progress and the specific value that's actually being had within that project. So it's not like you're doing the project and then some of that reporting is after the fact and you're doing some separate analysis.
Yeah, you just keep it up to date.
You can always go back to and look at what was done. And I think that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's definitely a couple different strategies for this how to do this. Like I was saying, the simplest way is just make the fields right on your project, or you can make a custom form that has the KPIs on there. And we're obviously, heavily investing in our program and portfolio features, so we're going to continue to add more out of the box ways to do it as well. But at the end of the day, having seen hundreds and thousands of clients, most clients have different KPIs. They have different things they're measuring. I've never really, you don't see two that are exactly the same.
No.
So it's,
right.
Yeah. And if you will help, reach out to support and we'll give you a hand if anyone out there.
We've got you covered, Karen, or anyone else.
Good. Yeah. Yep. So, I mean, now that you've been talking about KPIs for 45 minutes here, but the reality is as a project manager, if you are paying attention to these KPIs and not just looking in your little tunnel vision, you are going to gain some more leadership capabilities and leadership skills because you're looking at what affects the company. You're looking at what affects the customer. You're looking at, how this particular project impacts the overall growth of this organization. You're solving problems, in a different way with a different mindset, and it's, our job is hard to begin with, right? But I look at this kind of thing as the ability to shine in an organization because that what you're doing is impacting in a positive manner the organization and helping, or your client's organization and helping things move forward, versus just being, I'm just delivering a project. Nobody wants that.
Just getting the work done, whatever that is, whatever it ends up doing, right? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But just like anything else, it's never without pitfalls, right? And we talked about several times, there's different types of metrics and different types of KPIs. And again, keeping it small, but don't lean everything has to be manual. And the other one that you want to be careful of is they have a concept of vanity metrics versus actionable metrics. And vanity metrics are ones like, we have, 50,000 clients and 100,000 users, or we've doubled our revenue over those are somewhat vanity metrics, and you see them in marketing materials. And when I was putting this together, I was realizing is no wonder I just kind of roll my eyes sometimes when I see some marketing materials because they're just throwing all these vanity metrics out there. What I like seeing is the actionable ones, like, the retention rate, the churn rate, those kinds of things, the, net promoter score. Those are things like, this is telling me that people are liking this product. They're staying with this company. They're converting from a prospect to a client, in a high rate, so not that you shouldn't use vanity metrics. It's just another avenue, and just recognize that they're more about, look at me versus here's how my business is growing. So revenue is important. I'm not going to deny that revenue is important, but maybe percentage of revenue growth every year is better than saying, we are a $50 million company or a $20 million company or a $100 million company. Again, just think about that. It's not cast in concrete, but recognize that there's different types of metrics there.
Profitability, right? I may have grown by 25 million this last year, but it cost 50 to do so. And what was the point? So
yeah. So again, lots of things to think about. Yeah. And, I like this little cartoon here. So after careful consideration of all 437 charts, graphs, and metrics, I've decided to throw up my hands, hit the liquor store, and get snockered. Who's with me? Yeah. But again, after we talked through this whole webinar, I was like, I got to this point, and I'm like, this is a lot of data, and I don't want you to have a lot of data. I want you to have key data, things that really make sense. And to do that, you got to think about it early on, and you got to focus it and you gain a consensus. We're going to measure these 3 things. If we see growth in these 3 things, at the end of this project, we have success. And again, they need to tie to those objectives that we talked about in our charter, right? Mm-hmm. And they shouldn't be disconnected from the objectives in your charter. And, so it's just really important to kind of stay focused. And then there's always going to be objections, right? And as you deliver things, it's really important just to know when things are changing, to know when things have not worked well, and listen. I mean, that's again going back to my example of the feature that we delivered. We probably, it wasn't. It's my team now. I'm working with them now, but this was something that happened before. It's like, why didn't we review this with the client sooner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to sit here and push back on the client, because I looked at it and I said, yeah, it's ugly,
Yep.
And I get it. I know this client, and I know what they look for. And so we've regrouped and we understand them, and we've got other options that the team didn't really think about before. And so now we're going to go back and we're going to review that with the client. So there's going to be times when things that you were measuring don't come out right. And you've got to kind of think through it and say, okay, why didn't it work that way? And sometimes the client throws something at you and said, wasn't part of the KPIs that we agreed on. And, then that's a whole different story, whole different conversation. But
that's where it's nice to have them documented, what everybody had agreed to. So that way you can go back to that conversation and say, hey, that was not what we originally did, but we can get it done with some change, right?
Well, yeah. And I'll even give another little example on that whole thing with the customer experience piece. Then there was another little feature that they wanted, and our team started going down a path of, well, what's the easiest thing we can do? I'm like, time out. No, we just went through this other thing over here. It's like, no, we're not going to pick the easiest thing. We're going to pick the thing that and the customer's going to pay for it. They're not having a problem paying for it. I said, let's not pick the easiest. So know your customer, right?
Yes.
Know your customer. And then finally, just to kind of summarize everything, I'm sure a lot of you do this just intuitively. You're going to think about the set of relevant KPIs that you want to track, figure out how you want to create your dashboard or your scorecard, measure them throughout, evaluate them, and then adjust as you need. I mean, if things are not measuring up to what you expected, it's okay to adapt and adjust and continue to assess that until you get to the end. And sometimes the adjustment means that you have to end because you're never going to get there. But that's also an option as well. If what you're doing is not going to meet those KPIs, why spend the money on things that aren't going to make a difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is a great graphic. Identify, create, that part right there is how are you going to put it into the system if you're going to use Project Insight to do some of that. Mm-hmm. And then obviously evaluate, change, and assess as you executing once you've got yourself set up.
Yep. It adds a lot more on the PM side or on the team side, but it's so important to do throughout the project. And if like I said, just happened the other week, it's like, nobody wants to get to that meeting with the customer or that stakeholder, and this customer and stakeholder says, not good.
Yeah. If you develop a good system, then it won't be so difficult. You can train your whole staff and everyone the hardest part is going to be identify, create.
Yeah. Yep. So. And gain consensus on it. So
right. Yeah, that part.
Yeah. So any further questions we got out there, Matt?
Nothing at this point, but if there are, please feel free to use the chat and get your phones ready, right? So
there
please
you go.
Thanks everyone for attending.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to the additional sessions that we'll be hosting as well. To claim your PDU, though, go ahead and scan the QR code here. Again, you'll receive that link before the end of the week. And then we do have some upcoming webinars. You can join Steve and I on March 19th, where we're going to really talk about, are you burning out your team? And then you can join the trio for the next, part 3 of 4 here on April 9th. And then we'll close this series out on May 14th as well. So,
thank you. Thanks,
wonderful.
everybody. Yeah, check out our podcast.
Additionally, yeah, please, if project managers are the superheroes of their organizations. We have met with many different program and project managers through all sorts of different industries throughout our first season. Please give a shout out and listen on your favorite streaming service. So,
Thanks, everybody.
thank you.
I think we're at the end. Thank you, everybody. Looking forward to